Hey guys, welcome to another episode of The Rope of Hope. Today, for this episode, I should say today, this is the third episode today in the marathon of launch episodes, and I have Melissa with us. Thank you so much for joining me, Melissa. I'm so happy you're here.
I'm happy I'm here too. Thank you for asking me.
Of course. So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Okay. Well, my name is Melissa, and I am the host of a podcast as well. Mine is not a video podcast. So I had to actually get ready for this one. My podcast is called The Leftover Pieces, Suicide Loss Conversations. And I am a mother of 3 and a grandmother of 3. And I currently live in Florida with my husband and my granddog.
Your granddog?
Granddog. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I've never heard the term granddog. So is that like the dog of a dog? How does that work?
My son, who passed away from suicide, it's his dog.
Okay. That makes sense.
So therefore, I have people try to say, "Well, you're the mom now," and I said, "No, this is my son's dog. I'm grandma to this dog."
No, totally.
So she's the sacred grandpup, is what she is. So yeah,
that clicks in my head now because my brain is fried. So
no, I get it. And when people understand who she is, it makes sense to them too. So.
So I know you kind of just mentioned a little bit of your story there. You lost your son to suicide.
I lost my 21-year-old son, Alex, to suicide in August of 2016. He was almost a junior in college. He's my middle child.
Okay. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm happy to share whatever you want me to. So Alex was 21 in college, and he had been living there full time. So he was no longer, living at home. He had migrated to living up in his college town and was living full time at his fraternity. And he was a wonderful, outgoing, caring, energetic, smart kid. He had graduated from high school with an advanced international baccalaureate diploma and went to a rigorous academic college, became an officer in his fraternity. The last semester prior to his death, so the spring semester of 2016, he was struggling a bit. He didn't have a history with depression or anything like that. That he had talked about. Of course, in hindsight, the things you learn is that we all hide things sometimes better. So nobody will ever know. That's part of the problem with suicide loss and the complications is all the unanswered questions, right? So, but as far as I know, as his mother, he was very open about his struggles that semester, but it seemed to me, I hate to call it normal college angst, but, he had been very involved in his fraternity and was, he had a girlfriend for a year and then they broke up. And so going into that semester, I just kind of feel like he had kind of a lot of weight on his shoulders, but it felt to me to be the same kind of weight that a lot of us experience when we get ourselves in kind of behind the 8 ball in life. And suddenly you are growing up and life is stressful. And he was talking to me about it and he was going to the counseling center and, it felt, for lack of a better term, handled and under control. But I've never taken depression or mental health issues not seriously. And so when he came home, even though he wasn't living at home, he came home for 5 weeks because the place he was working closed for like a couple months because it's a small college town. And he decided he would come home for that period. And so he was home for 5 of the 6 weeks prior to his death. And so I did talk to him right before he went back to college, because he had seemed fine the whole time he was home. And I didn't want to ego eye him and do the mom thing and like be prodding at him because he seemed okay. But before he went back to college, I did sit him down and say, you to me, face to face, are you good? Do we need to, I mean, I knew he wasn't going to the counseling center anymore. He had tried an antidepressant, but didn't like it, felt like it had some effects. And so he'd only taken it a few weeks. And I just kind of touched base with him on that and said, are you okay? And he was kind of not feeling like he wanted to be at that college and was struggling with, but he was a kind of a person who saw things through and was committed to things and stuff like that. So giving up on the idea of, going a different direction he was struggling with. And we talked about some of his options of, you could come back and we could do this or that. And you don't have to look at it as quitting or failure. Just look at it as changing paths, because we all have to do that in life. But young people have to experience that. And when he left to go back to Kirksville, I remember looking at my husband that day and saying, I'm pretty sure he's going to come home and we're going to go another path. We talked about a couple different colleges. We had, I just kind of in my mom gut thought he's going to call me in a couple weeks and say, hey, let's talk about some other options, Mom. I knew it enough that I told my husband, I think he'll probably be coming back. And, whether it's after this semester or before, I felt like he'd be coming back home. And 8 days later, he was gone. So, I mean, a lot of people call suicide unexpected. There are people that can say the suicide may have been expected. There are people that have multiple attempts and different things that may indicate that they're suicidal. We did not have any of those outwardly. We later found out that, he had mentioned feeling that upset to a few of his fraternity brothers that had done nothing about it, but those are whole different stories. But from where we all stood, it was a complete surprise.
So as a mom, and I'm a mother, how do you even begin to process? What emotion?
Well, as a mother, I'm sure you can, and see, this is the thing, as a mom, I too was a mother who would have looked at somebody like myself and said, I don't know how you do this. I don't know how you would even begin to do this. And, I never knew anybody directly that lost a child to any manner. I knew people that had lost children, but never knew anyone directly. And so I know I lived in that club where I would say things like, when you'd hear of a tragedy of a child lost or something, I don't know how somebody does that. I think it would take me out too. And the only thing I have to say afterwards is, one, shock is there for quite a while, which is our body's way of protecting ourselves, because it is too much trauma to bear if our body didn't come in and put us in this, I call it grief fog, but it's more than that. It is shock. You're in shock for quite a while. I have kind of a slideshow of snapshots from that especially first few months, where I don't have any recall of certain things. And I have snapshot recall of other things. And some of it I have story recall, meaning I've heard people talk about certain things about that time enough that I probably have an imprinted recall. So that's how you deal with it in the beginning. You just get through it by going through every day and getting up again and trying again. And the first year is shock. The second year for me was worse because the shock was starting to wear off. And I've heard that said by more than one grieving parent, that by the time you get to the second year, my terminology for it was the reality was setting in. He wasn't coming home. I still sometimes, my brain doesn't believe, Kimberly, that he's going to come home, but I still believe I think he can, right? So it's still, I hear grievers of suicide loss say this all the time. It feels like it was just last yesterday this happened, and I feel like it was an eternity ago that it happened. Both of those things exist. And so after getting through the first couple years, you just start putting the pieces back together. And that's kind of where the leftover pieces came from, because I literally had to look at the leftover pieces of my shattered heart and my shattered life and start I'm figuring out how to put that back together and what that was going to look like. And, you know, we have choices in life, right? And I could choose to let this completely destroy me, or I could choose to figure out how to live a happy, successful version of what my life is now. And I just want to be really clear to distinguish that, because that's part of the journey for me, was somewhere in year 2, realizing that even though I wasn't consciously thinking, I've got to get back to my old self, somewhere inside of you, that's what you kind of think is going to happen. And it wasn't until I really embraced the fact that the loss of one of my children took enough from me as a human being that I wasn't the same. Doesn't mean there aren't still some core parts of us that are the same, but it had changed me enough that I had to look at myself and my life and the people in it and the choices I was making as a new life. And that I was just going to be going down a different path now. You know, my life abruptly changed the minute my child drew his last breath. And there isn't any taking that back. So in certain types of loss, people talk about healing. And I'm definitely healing, but I feel like I'm on a healing journey. I'm not on a healing. There's no destination here. This is going to be a lifelong journey. I'm going to be healing parts of myself, hopefully helping heal others, having conversations, trying to make a difference as part of my journey in living alongside this grief for the rest of my life.
Well, I know you said that this event is what spurred you to start the leftover pieces. Were there any resources like that for you when everything happened?
Yes and no. So the reason I started the podcast was because for me, podcasts became something that I was enjoying, that I could do. I found that my grief fog was so bad that the thought of reading, people give you books a lot of times after death because they're like, I don't know what to say, here's a book, right? So I mean, truthfully, and so I had books and I had every good intention, and you get a sentence or two in and then it was just I just couldn't concentrate to read. And so that's how podcasts kind of entered my life. And starting to search for suicide loss podcasts, I just couldn't find any. I found a decent amount in the grief space. And I connected with a few of those. And one day, and listening to one of them, and within those grief ones, there was occasionally somebody that would have a suicide loss. So there would be like an episode here and there. But the few suicide loss podcasts I found at the time were old. They had done a few episodes and never went any further. So you see what I'm getting? They weren't actively recording. Mm-hmm. And one day I kind of just was thinking, I just wish there was something for around suicide loss. And I kind of just went, well, I guess I could do that. And it just kind of took hold. And I even spent weeks trying to, scratch out names and come up with names and whatever. And the name came up rather organically and probably not necessarily in a positive manner, but there's a lot of fracture that can occur. And as you can imagine, heavy feelings after suicide loss within a family. And there was a family member that had said that they felt like after Alex died, they not only lost Alex, but they were just left with the leftover pieces of Melissa. And initially that kind of like hurt me. And within a very short period of time, I found my own self going, why does that have to be a bad thing? Why do the leftover pieces have to be bad? Why can't leftover pieces of something still be put back into something that is good and whole and happy. Why it may not look the same, it may not function exactly the same, but it's still it's so that's why my logo is a broken heart with some pieces missing, because it's still a heart. It just kind of symbolizes the idea that, I am what is here from the leftover pieces of such a trauma, such a tragedy. We all have a lot of that in our life, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it is amazing that you have created this space for other parents and family members that have gone through this. I commend you for it, because you have taken something that is so difficult and you're helping other people try to navigate through that as well. So I applaud you for that. I think it is a wonderful thing that you're doing.
Well, I appreciate that. As I'm sure you know, wish like anything it wasn't what I am supposed to be doing, but at this point it is what I'm supposed to be doing. So it's to me the jumping off space for where I'm going to spend the rest of my life, which is in the space of continuing conversations on suicide loss and mental health and grief normalization and trauma. And, I'm working on certifications and things that will allow me to work in that space as well. But this podcast is just what I'm supposed to be doing. And it's truly a something of my heart. It's about creating a community space for those of us that feel this is such a lonely grief. Suicide still has so much stigma, and mental health still has stigma, and there's so many questions and so much guilt and shame and all those things that still go along with this loss, that we just need this. We need community, even though we wish we didn't.
Right. Well, I'm going to ask you or invite you to please, on the Rope of Hope podcast page, make a post talking about your podcast and promote your podcast, because if anybody is listening to this or watching this and you're going through this, I invite you to listen to Melissa's podcast and know that you're not alone in it.
Well, thank you. And I'm really glad that you are, putting this podcast together with different people's stories of overcoming and survival, because life is hard, and we just, I mean, life is hard, right? We can just put a period there. Life is hard, and we never know what's going to happen, and nothing is guaranteed, and all those cliches, but they're all true.
Very much so. Well, I do want to thank you so much for bearing your soul and sharing this story. I'm having a hard time not crying, but I know you commented to me beforehand that if I cried, you were going to cry. So I'm trying.
It's okay. Well, I cry all the time, so it's okay. I tell people crying is just as good as laughing. I mean, as far as it's an emotion, that's one of the things I tell people. You'll only get through this stuff if you feel what you feel, and I think there's saying you have to feel to heal, right? So
that is true. Well, I am going to ask you one final question, and this is my episode question that I'm asking every guest.
Okay.
What is the most inspiring thing that has ever been said to you?
The most inspiring thing that's ever been said to me. I'm assuming you mean since losing Alex.
No, in life itself.
I think that in general, the most inspiring thing that if I were to think about feeling inspired, Kimberly, I would think that I go back to saying that we are about the choices that we make. And so while that's not a quote per se, I have had several people in my life that have been very inspiring, and that's the message that they have given me. And that's the one I like to choose to push forward. Is life is really hard, but we do have choices in how we respond. It's kind of the whole idea of we can't control what happens to us, but we can control how we choose to respond to it. And it doesn't mean it's always easy. It can be harder than, just to be clear, it may be really hard to stick with our choices sometimes once we've made them, but it truly is about, and when we fall, we choose to stay down or get back up, right? So it's just about choice.
Well, I would love to be able to put that on my page if that's okay with you. I would like to make a little slide for that quote.
Sure, of course.
Well, again, thank you so much for coming on here, for speaking with not only myself, but anybody who watches and or hears this podcast. I am truly blessed for knowing you.
Thank you.
Of course.
It's been a pleasure.
If you guys have been inspired, encouraged by this episode or any other episodes, and you want to help keep me caffeinated, just go to buymeacoffee.com/thisfatgirllife. I will be back here in about 30 to 45 minutes with our next episode in the launch marathon. So, guys, come back with me. Bye.
Bye.